get started. It is 11:40 my time. Welcome to everyone, wherever you are in the world. Happy to have you here. My name is Vienna Farron. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I practice in New York City. I work with individuals and couples within the context of relationships. And I consider myself a systems theorist. My belief is that we are part of systems that really shape our belief systems and realities. And I take the lens in my work is generally through family systems lens, understanding our origin stories. And that's how I face couples and individuals in that space. So today, we are unpacking beliefs about race. I will explicitly state that we have 20 minutes to do this. And we know that this is a lifelong, forever commitment to the practice. My hope for today is that you have one takeaway at minimum that you reflect upon. And that we continue to do this work. So we know that we will not be able to get to all of it here. So James Baldwin's words and writing has been really profound for me. As a side note, if anybody has not seen I Am Not Your Negro, I would very much recommend watching it. But his words and writing really have been profound and pierced through something for me. And I pulled these two quotes because I think it helps with the framework that we're going to be looking at today. So children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but that they have never failed to imitate them. And precisely at the point when you begin to develop a conscience, you must find yourself at war with your society. So talking about two of the systems that I think are so important for us to explore and unpack, right? Society at large, and also elders, our family systems, the adults in our lives, the people who came before us. So where do our beliefs come from? Cognitively, this is going to be pretty simple and straightforward for you all. The adults, media, systems, society, school, religion, just to name a few. And so again, cognitively, that might be really straightforward. You may have considered many of these areas already. But to zoom in a little bit, we're born and then people start telling us about ourselves. They tell us what we ought to believe, who we are, how we should be showing up in the world, how we should be acting, behaving, etc. And we absorb all of that. It's not until later on in life where we start to question and challenge some of those things, right? It's like a 4-year-old and dad says, boys don't cry. 4-year-old self doesn't say, Dad, I'd love to, challenge that belief system with you and question it, right? So we are absorbing all of these things. And we do that because we believe that the adults know. We believe that the systems around us are here to guide and protect and provide for. And that can be really dangerous because so much that is handed over is unintegrated, right? It's coming from unintegrated pain, wounding, suffering, and trauma. And so if we just take all of that, we are holding and carrying within us things that we haven't decided for ourselves whether they are integrated or not. That doesn't mean that everything that's given to us is bad or wrong, but that it comes to a point in our lives where we have to start questioning that. And so some of you may have been doing this for quite some time, and others might be new to this. So beliefs, messaging, conditioning, programming, whatever language you like, they come to us either through implicit or explicit lanes, right? So what do I mean by that? Implicit is implied through observation, expectation, and experience. So within the context of race, and specific to this Black revolution right now. An example of that might be you see white women repeatedly clutch their purse in the presence of a Black man. It might be very little or no representation of Black lives or experiences in children's toys, books, etc. It might be little or no representation of Black beauty in media. So implicit messaging it can be very subtle. It likes to creep in when we're not looking for it. Sometimes it's something that we observe, and other times it's actually the absence of what it is that's not present, right? So the little or no representation of Black lives or experiences or Black beauty, it's just the absence of that's not right in front of us. And so we're not even thinking about those things, but the absence is still informing something for us, yeah? So explicit beliefs, messages, articulated, named with verbal expression. It's direct and generally quite obvious. So you might hear racist jokes from family or friends, or you may have been explicitly told that you couldn't date or hang around a Black person, right? So we can start to see the difference between implicit versus explicit. This is a really powerful framework. Obviously for today's workshop, it's all within the context of race, but you can use this framework as you start to unpack and explore all of the different areas of your lives and zoom in on what are the beliefs and messages that I received in all of these different areas. So, prompts for exploration. I love prompts. I think they're a beautiful way of diving further into the work. And I'm actually going to ask all of you, although I can't see the chat box right now, I'm going to read these off to you, and I'd love for everybody here to answer one of them. Just sit with whichever one like allows your answer to come forward. You can send it to me privately. You can send it to the group. It is a totally safe place for us to get uncomfortable and dive into this a bit. But I'll read this and just pick one. You can come back to this. It's all being recorded. You'll be able to see this slide again. So when I think about racism, I feel. Acknowledging the racism in my family and within me feels. How my family of origin, meaning parents, caretakers, anyone in your nuclear system growing up, spoke about Black people was. The first memory I have around race is. What I remember about that moment as a kid, teenager is. The explicit messages I received around Black people growing up were. The implicit messages I received around Black people growing up were. Naming these now feels. The part of me that wants to resist this exploration is. So take a moment. I'll give you about 30 seconds here. Just choose one, see if you can answer it, throw it in the chat box when you have a chance. Okay. Perfect, I got the chat box open without stopping this. Okay. When I think about racism, I feel sad. Acknowledging the racism in my family feels scary but necessary. Acknowledging the racism in my family and within me feels confusing. Naming these now feels overwhelming, infuriating, and like there's no option but to fight the system we've built as white people all at once. When I think about racism, I feel uneducated. When I think about racism, I feel overcome with emotion and frustration. There's so many who don't want progress or to see how they comply. The explicit messages were almost non-existent. It just never came up or were seen in my childhood. It was a void later filled with pop culture and stereotypes. Beautiful. Thank you guys for sharing all of this. Keep putting them in there. I think it'll be beautiful for everybody to see some of the ones that are coming in. I know that a lot of them are private, but I'll get to that. So moving along here though. So what makes this hard? Well, a lot of things, but I pulled 3 Ds: defensiveness, denial, and distractions. So the human commitment to the self is to protect the self at all costs, right? So any feedback that challenges that we are good or right is something that we tend to look away from, reject, deny, defend, or distract from, right? Our commitment, we want to protect the self at all costs. And so when that feedback is coming in, the arrow is pointing to our shadow or the shadow of a system. There's a part that really likes to reject it and push and hide from it. We want to disown, no, not me. Right? Because it's hard to sit in that space. So moving right into, it's hard to sit with the parts of ourselves that cause harm, contribute to the pain, suffering, and trauma of others, even if it's unintentional, right? especially if it's unintentional, right? It can feel so intolerable that we keep our blinders on and double down on our position, right? Those blinders on, those horse blinders, right? This comes out and we're going to prove our own point. We're going to battle. We're going to double down. We're going to distract and make it about something else, right? So this idea of how do I sit with myself and receive feedback and actually look at the things that are important for me to observe within myself. These things, defensiveness, denial, and distractions, absolutely make this hard for us to do. I think of distractions as any attempt that keeps us from looking at the parts of the self that reflect something back to us that feels intolerable for us to sit with, right? So, one of the most obvious examples I think we've been seeing is when someone says Black Lives Matter, right? The distraction might be all lives matter. I think we've probably all seen it, heard it, read it before. That moves the attention away from the initial statement. I must distract away from this because sitting with that statement, sitting with the emotion that comes up for me is too intolerable. So I need to make it about something else. Yeah. Right, so our job is to notice how these things come up for us. It is human of us to go into some of this. We've all been there before. Noticing the defensiveness, the denial, and distractions is a huge, huge part of this work. And you're probably seeing a lot of this in people in your life too, maybe in your family systems, friend systems, certainly strangers around the world, and just noticing and coming back to these 3Ds, how they are presenting around you and how you're responding to that as well. So what should we do? We're talking about unpacking our beliefs, but then we have to do something with it to bring it back together. So this was sort of a free flow for me. I think this list can go on and on and on. But as a start point, I came up with 6 things that I think are important for us to be aware of. So the first, sit with our discomfort. You've probably heard this many times over, but our work is to face it. It's our need to be willing to get uncomfortable, to notice the denial, the defensiveness, and the distractions, and create some space with them. So what I mean by creating space with them is that you will do that at some point. Right? You will find yourself in that space at some point. And even if you can't catch it in the moment, right, our job is to come back to it when we have that chance. Maybe we have a little bit of breathing room. Maybe it's an hour later, a day later, a week later, but to come back into that space and to sit with the denial, the defensiveness, and the distractions. What is uncomfortable within me? How do I make space to be an observer of that and feel that? Second, recognize the self as a collection of parts instead of just one being. This work is so important. Parts work in the therapy world, internal family systems is a model that we use. And what's important about this is that when we identify the self as all bad, all wrong, all a failure, you can understand the amplification of why we might want to defend ourselves, why we might want to push back away from this. So when we recognize that we are a collection of parts, right, there's a little bit more room to actually sit with some of this. A part of me is asleep. A part of me is feeling defensive. A part of me is shutting down. A part of me is trying to protect something about myself that I don't know how to face yet. So it's important to see the parts as opposed to all of me is bad or wrong. Right? When that gets clumped together, our defense mechanisms amplify, they become very extreme in that space. So a reminder that we are parts, that our job is to work with these parts and to, be able to bring compassion for the self forward. Compassion not meaning that we are excusing ourselves, right? But compassion forward so that there's a little bit of room to be with ourselves without it being so harsh and shame driven. 3, answer prompts. Bring your unconscious beliefs and programming forward. This is a practice of waking up. So the prompts that I offered, there's endless prompts on the internet. I have a resource for you after this, on the next slide. But continue to do that work. right? Challenge to answer those questions. Be with whatever it is that's coming up for you, right? There's so much unconscious programming and conditioning, right? We're trying to update an operating system. It is not as simple as pressing a button on your phones, right? Like, we have to do this heavy lifting work to understand what our unconscious beliefs have been. 4, remind yourself that this work doesn't end. It's a commitment to the exploration, the waking up, the acknowledgement, and accountability over and over again. You're not going to be able to do this in a week. This is a forever commitment, as is all of our growth and, healing and transformation in the world. 5, be with the grief. As you begin to recognize things that have hung out in your blind spots for some time, it's possible that a flooding of emotion surfaces. So you're probably feeling some emotions, and it might be really intense. When transition is happening for us at any point, anywhere in our lives, we are both moving into and towards expansion, and we are also leaving something behind. There's a lot of attention, and this grief is strong. I don't know if anybody has been feeling it already. I know I certainly have been, but know and create space for there to be grief there. Acknowledge that there might be a flooding of emotion that's happening. And, sometimes we can get really angry and harsh with ourselves when we haven't seen something before, when it's been in a blind spot and then it starts to come into focus for us, right? It's like, notice all of that emotion that is there and make sure that you spend time with it. And then lastly, our job is to begin to reconstruct new beliefs and new actions, replace old narratives with new narratives. This must be integrated and not performative. I'll come back to that. Take action where it feels deeply aligned. Do one or a couple of things with deep commitment instead of spreading your energy into 20 different areas and diluting it. So integration does not happen in a week. Okay. Integration doesn't happen in 2 weeks, right? Integration is a commitment to the practice over and over and over again. I imagine that since you're on these calls today, you're probably aware of some of the performative stuff that's been going on. Integration is not performative. Integration lives within us. It doesn't live outside of us, right? And so for something to live within us, we have to spend a lot of time with it. We have to be with it. We have to explore it. We have to turn over every stone, pick it up, examine it, and figure out how we're going to place it again. So those are the 6. I'm feeling like, wow, we're unpacking all of this in 20 minutes. I'm like, I need hours to do this, but we're moving right along. So additional resources from the Black community. And I think, Maddie, you're going to throw in these links for everyone so that you guys can click through to this. The first one is 8 anti-racism workshops and classes. And I took a look at the 8 that were chosen, and they are such beautiful voices, beautiful workshops and classes that we can participate in. So take a look at that. And then Lisa Renee's article with beautiful writing prompts to deepen this work. This article speaks to so much, and she has incredible, rich prompt to explore more of the biases, more of the programming, more of the beliefs that are there for many of us. So all right, I nailed that. I stopped right at the 20-minute mark so that we have 10 minutes of Q&A. Love to be in conversation with all of you. If there's anything that came up for you on the slides, or want me to go into something a little bit further, I would love to do that. I will stop sharing the screen so I can come back to all of you. All right, how's everybody doing? That was a quick deep dive in. All right, so go ahead. Thank you, Maddie, for sending these over. Seeing a lot of the prompts being answered. Okay, so one question: any prompts for starting this conversation with your parents or friends? We We know those systems really well. And so for many of us, we can probably anticipate and predict how somebody might respond to things. And so there is a bit of this that feels strategic in how you bring something forward, especially when we're really attached to a desirable outcome. You know, I think we want people to understand. We want people to move the blinders out of the way and to connect to this. And so, you know, I think our approach with it is understanding what our attachment is in terms of the outcome and sort of moving it back into how do I want to be in this process with you. So, and I think that you can try to share some of your own exercise with the prompts yourself, right? So what that could look like is, hey, I was on a breakout group today, and one of the prompts was this, and I thought that was interesting because what came up for me was X, Y, and Z. And that might be a good conversation starter because the attention is on you. It's not about forcing somebody to look at something that they might not be ready to look at, but that there's a little bit more ease in them being able to see it in you. When we can take ownership and hold the accountability and use our own language in a non-threatening way, then sometimes we can model something for another. I certainly understand and know firsthand that, you know, sometimes no matter how we frame it or how we bring it forward, there's going to be a lot of resistance and blocks there. So I know that it's not always easy, but I would encourage people to bring it forward from their own lane, from their own experience and what it is that you're recognizing and noticing within yourself. And so, you know, you can use the prompts that I've offered you here. The article will offer some other really great prompts as well. Okay, so another question is, can you say more about what is performative? Is it just the internal motivation that matters? You know, I think, again, when I was talking about the self wanting to be good, sometimes the performative piece is, I just want to do what's going to make somebody else happy or going to offer somebody else relief. And okay, you know, there's nuance to that, of course, right? To a degree, I absolutely can understand that, but it's so much more powerful when the motivation is from the internal, right? It's, I deeply understand what it is that I'm talking about, right? I'm not just putting something out there in order to be good or seen as good by others, right? I'm bringing something forward that is deeply aligned, that resonates with me, that is in my integrity, that I've taken time to actually unpack and understand. So yes, it was a private question, but yes, that internal motivation and that internal understanding and intimacy with the self. When I think about intimacy, I think about a practice of going innermost with the self and then innermost with others, ones we choose to let in and vice versa. And so this work to go innermost with the self, to understand the programming, the conditioning, the belief systems, to spend some time there and then to bring it forward from an integrated place is the work, in my opinion. Okay. How do you deal with someone in a position of power who is resistant? Let me just see if she added more. Okay, I'm not going to name who that is. I saw another message come in from this person, and it was, yeah. Okay, so I was going to ask a follow-up question, but now I'm going to honor that boundary to not take it any further. In my own mind, I'm thinking position of power may be a boss, somebody in the work environment, someone who holds a key to something about your life. And so when you want to challenge something, that there is a consequence there that is really hard to sit with. And I think this relationship to consequences is a really important one that I think we're all facing right now is, do I stand in my truth, right? My integrated truth, and what consequences will I face when I do that? And the reality of it is that some of these consequences are very big for us, meaning we may not have a relationship with a friend we loved dearly for decades of our lives, or we might cut off from somebody in a family system who has been a part of our lives forever, or we may lose a job, or we may walk away from a job, right? These consequences are significant, but to sort of answer this question, I think it requires us to explore our relationship with consequences. When we are setting and keeping boundaries in our lives, it also means that we have to be willing to face a consequence in that. And so I was going to get into more of the specifics of it, but I think that in order to figure out how I'm going to press something or bring something forward means that I also need to be exploring what consequence I'm willing and able to sit with. I'm going to move on from this one because I think that the person would like us to. And let's see. So this chat box is not going to be seen by anybody who views the video afterwards. Okay, so just so you know, this is not going to be out to the world. Okay, so we're at the 3-minute left mark. Maddie, are you supposed to jump in with a link for what happens next? I'll answer this next question, but I wanted to make sure that we were closing in and staying on time with everything, because I know that there is a next step to this. So I'll let you put that in the chat box, and then this last question. My mother is so resistant to these ideas of white privilege, and we both just end up crying anytime I try to explain it to her and get her to change her perspective and see things through others' experiences. She stands on the ground of, I have struggled in my life, and I am white, therefore I have no privilege. How can our relationship move forward if she refuses to come around? There's complexity to this, of course, and we tend to confuse, privilege with, any type of suffering. Every single one of us has a story. They have pain, wounding, trauma. I probably don't need to explain this to the folks who are on this call, because all of you probably do understand most of this. But I think, this complexity with people we care about and love so much in our lives, and how desperate we want them to be able to understand it, it feels earth-shattering, right? It can feel, I don't mean to be dramatic, but it can feel like a death of a relationship, because we have no idea how we can move forward in the relationship if a person is just blocked and unwilling to see it. So again, many, many layers, but I think, we can't force somebody else to see something differently. Right? Our hope, of course, through different angles, whether it's workshops, podcasts, books, conversation, documentaries, etc. Sometimes there's a way in which something lands a little bit differently for people. But part of this is that you may relate to the relationship a bit differently. The truth is, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to cut everybody out of your life, but you may consider how the relationship might start to shift and have to change if there are major differences that feel very fundamental to your moral compass, and the work that you're doing in this world. Now, there can be a lot of grief that's connected to that, associated with that. There's so much complexity here. We could do a sort of a big session just on answering that. But, when we're just trying to push two of these pieces together, the rub is there, and we know that there's a big resistance. Maybe you offer your mom a recording of this chat to talk about defensiveness, denial, and distractions. But people are sometimes deeply committed to not understanding something. There's a threat there. And, that work, maybe you go to therapy together. Maybe you shift your idea of what the relationship is going to be. But, in the 2 minutes we had to answer that, I hope that offers a few options for you. So, yeah, it does feel earth-shattering. It is a death. Okay. I totally am willing to share the presentation slides, and somebody asked about that. So absolutely. We can figure out how that gets sent out to all of you. So Maddie and I can figure out with the group how to do that. Thank you all again so much for being here, for being on the whole call today, and for joining me for this little breakout group. I know it's a deep dive into really important work that we did very, very quickly. So I hope that you got one thing out of this that you can reflect on and be with and sit with.